Picture this. You're a young bride, named Margot, 18 winters old. Legally, a woman in her village's eyes, standing in the low doorway of a stone cottage in the autumn of 1347. The rushes under your bare feet crackle as you cross the threshold. Bits of fennel and mint, someone scattered to sweeten the floor, release their sharp green scent under your heels. Candlelight shakes along the soot-black rafters and flutters across Henrik's weathered face as he steps inside. He is nearly twice your age, chosen by your father because he could offer 3 pigs, a serviceable plough team, and half an acre of barley set just beyond the hedgerow. On your chest hangs a leather cord threaded through a small token, a mother's keepsake, a charm, or perhaps just the comfort of something familiar pressed against your skin. Your fingers find it without thinking. Outside, voices thicken. Ale-warmed friends rattle wooden spoons along the rim of a cauldron, drumming a crude, jubilant rhythm that passes for a blessing. Someone sings a snatch of a bawdy rhyme, and others answer with laughter that seeps through the wattle and daub walls like smoke. No one leaves yet, not the neighbors, not the cousins, not the boys who ran ahead with torches to light the lane. They are waiting, as custom instructs them to wait, for proof that the arrangement sealed with words and ale has been sealed with bodies as well. In this world, the marriage bed is not a sanctuary but a kind of public ledger, and the community is its witness. You draw your mother's woolen shift closer, not new, only new to you. She stitched it again this week, neatened the seams where years had thinned the cloth, and tied the waist with a narrow braid of undyed wool. She wore it once. Her mother wore it before. It is a garment that belongs to the right more than to any one person. Tonight it stands in for all the women who have stood where you stand, just inside a doorway, half in the room and half in the reach of other people's expectations. No one pretends this is romance. It is arithmetic. Your father weighed what he could spare against what he hoped to secure a stronger roof when winter winds push against the cottage, seed for spring, a hand on the plough strong enough to finish the furrow before dusk. Your mother weighed something else, the thin margin by which daughters survive. The village weighs everything. Who will inherit? Who will be liable for the tithe and the tollage? Who will have the next pair of hands to glean the strip of barley when the heads go heavy? The ceremony that mattered most has already happened, the bedding. Guests shepherded you and Henrik through the door with hoots and arm pats. A carnival of instruction where women teased you in whispers and men clapped Henrik's shoulder as if they were sending him to a wrestling match. In some parishes they would have undressed the couple and tucked them in with mock gravity, a ritual that made privacy into a communal joke. In yours, they drew the curtain across the rope bed and stationed themselves kindly jailers on the far side. The room itself testifies to how little privacy means here. A rope-strung bed creaks near the hearth. A trundle pallet slides beneath it for children or kin. A cradle waits, though there is no child yet. Clay cups crowd a shelf beside a crucifix fashioned from 2 shaved twigs bound with twine. At the hearth, to a pot of barley pottage furred with onion skins, keeps warm for the watchers who will eat again before staggering home. A cat flicks its tail at the door, deciding whether the commotion is worth braving for the butter dish. Nothing in this space is entirely yours except the silence inside your chest. Henrik's hands are work-rough and careful, more accustomed to reins and mattock than to ceremony. He smells of wool and damp leather and a hint of smoke that never leaves anyone who lives in a single-room house with a fire at its heart. When he lifts the edge of the curtain, the jeers outside swell, then settle. He like wind that wants to be a storm, but spends itself in gusts. He says your name under his breath, as if testing whether it will fit in his mouth. You answer, because answering is what the night expects from you. Let's say you and I are not here to eavesdrop on anything that belongs only to 2 people. We're here to listen to the larger story breathing under the door, the story that makes this private moment public business. In Margot's world, intimacy is a public concern because lineage is a public concern who inherits a plough strip, who owes a lord's service, who will be counted in the next levy. A wedding is not finished by feasting, It is completed by consummation because law and custom say only then can land pass cleanly from father to child. So the neighbors keep vigil and pretend that by hearing something, any sound they have witnessed, what must be witnessed, for the account books of this small world to balance. You know this already. Because the older women told you. They told you about the laughter and the songs and how to turn your face so people won't see fear and call it stubbornness. They told you about the linen sheet set out beneath the bed's coverlet and the way someone's aunt, or cousin, or busybody will find an excuse to peek at it later. Not because she is cruel, though she may be, but because her certainty keeps the village from unraveling into quarrel. They also told you the tricks women keep in reserve for the nights when certainty feels like a trap, how a pricked finger can stain linen, how a drop of chicken's blood, if it must come to that, dries too dark, unless you cut it with water. Whether these things are done or only whispered matters less than the truth behind the whispers that young wives live inside a gate of other people's eyes. Notice, too, the calendar chafing at your shoulders. It will chafe more in the parts of this story to come. The church's seasons braid themselves around ordinary life, telling you what may be done and when. Tonight is not a feast eve, nor a Sunday, nor the heart of a fasting season. The priest nodded in the church porch and blessed the union with the practiced gravity of a man who has traced the sign of the cross over too many pairs to count, and yet you felt the weight of his gaze, as if he were appraising not just your promise to obey, but the future conduct of your marriage, in a place where confession makes the bed a ledger and doctrine measures desire in sins avoided rather than kindnesses offered. Even consent becomes a calculation. You will learn that calculation by heart. Step back one more pace, and the year itself casts a longer shadow across the door. It is 1347, and though the cottage sits far from any harbour, talk travels quicker than carts. The men who return from market repeat what they heard from a peddler, who heard it from a carter who swears on his saint's bones that ships from the south have made harbour carrying something worse than cargo, a sickness that tarries in fleas and rats and human breath. A dark rider no one can see until it has already stepped inside. Whether your village will see it this year or the next, the rumour sharpens everyone's nerves. When death seems to be passing from hand to hand like a coin, people clutch harder at certainty. Babies must be legitimate, heirs must be counted, beds must be witnessed. The laws that bind bodies to households and households to fields feel, to those who keep them, like the only thread strong enough to hold in a storm. Listen to the sounds again. A spoon against iron, a woman's voice hushed in a scold, and then a laugh. The scrape of leather on the threshold, as some neighbour shifts his weight and mutters that he'll be home once the matter is settled. The room answers with its own small chorus, the lick of flame, the fidget of a cat, the nervous sigh a hinge makes when the wind noses at the door. This is not a love story. Not yet. Maybe never in the way stories want love to be. It is a story about how a village keeps going, and the price individual people pay so the village can. If you, watching from centuries away, find this unsettling, you are hearing correctly. Medieval intimacy was never truly intimate. The community, the church, and a heap of old superstitions all owned a share in what happened between spouses. That is the landscape we will cross in this series, not to gawk, but to understand how fear, doctrine, and survival braided themselves into rules that could make a modern listener shiver. If the hidden scaffolding of ordinary lives fascinates you, if you want more of these unvarnished histories, consider tapping like and subscribe. And tell us where in the world you're listening from. It always amazes me that we can gather around the same fire of curiosity from such distant places. Back in the cottage, Margot's breath slows. Henrique's voice is clear, almost formal, as if he realizes they are completing a contract that is older than either of them. Beyond the curtain, the neighbors wait for a sign, a cough, a murmur, any human sound that will let them disperse, satisfied that order has been preserved. When they finally drift away down the lane, they will leave behind a room that still smells of wet wool and wood smoke, a bed that has become a ledger, a pair of lives newly hitched to the harness of a community's expectations. The candles flame gutters, steadies. Outside, the drum of spoons quiets to the occasional clatter, and then nothing at all. And now, in the first clean silence of the night, the greater story steps forward, the one that says the bedroom in this century is a battlefield of rules, terror, tenderness, and endurance, and that nothing that happens there is ever entirely private. By daylight, the cottage looks smaller, as if the night had lent it a little grandeur and morning took it back. Margot ties her hair with a strip of linen, tastes smoke on her tongue, and goes about the work that steadies hands, stir the embers, set the pot, rinse the earthen cups with water gone metallic from the barrel's hoops. This is how the arithmetic begins, not with a priest's thunder, but with small chores and a quiet count kept under the breath. The calendar lives in her head now like a second ledger, not only seed time and harvest, not only market days and saints' feasts, but the more intimate ledger of permitted and forbidden nights. The church taught that even within marriage, desire must move in harness. Early voices set the tone, and their sentences kept echoing in parish pulpits centuries later. A severe saying attributed to Jerome haunts the catechism lessons: a husband who loves his wife with too much ardor risks stepping over a line, confusing the sacrament's sober purpose with the unruly heat of appetite. Around such sentences, an ethic hardens marriage is honorable. Yes, but desire must be bridled, directed to procreation and mutual duty, not indulgence. Pleasure itself is suspect when it becomes the reason rather than the accompaniment. Penitential books and sermons turn these suspicions into schedules. There are days when a married couple ought to abstain as a matter of obedience: Sundays, eves of major feasts, the long lanes of Advent and Lent, Ember Days and Rogation Days, vigils, fasts, and times set aside for mourning or thanksgiving. Add to that the seasons and states of the body that custom deems off-limits: menstruation, pregnancy, the period after childbirth, the months of nursing. To this pile, some confessors add Wednesdays and Fridays as routine fasts, and Saturdays in honor of the Virgin. None of this is carved uniformly across Europe. Custom is a patchwork quilt, but the impression it leaves inside a cottage like Margot's is the same. The list is long. Scholastic thinkers in the 13th century tried to make order of these currents, building lattices of licit and illicit, natural and against nature. Their language travels far, becoming parish talk stripped of the disputations that birthed it. What reaches a young wife is simple enough to memorize. There is one proper marital posture that mirrors what they imagined: the order of creation to be man above, woman beneath, face to face. Anything that overturns that hierarchy courts danger, not because the body rebels, but because the cosmos, they say, does. Soliciting acts that turn mouths from bread and prayer, or seeking novelty for its own sake, falls under harsher words still. This is the catechism of limits, and no one recites the list aloud within earshot of the children, yet everyone knows it. Confession ensures that the list is not merely known, but counted. The priest's questions are not prurient in his own mind. They are precise tools meant to locate sin the way a physician palpates a bruise. Did you keep the fasts? Did you honor the holy days? Did you seek pleasure beyond what is fitting? Did you endanger a soul by urging what should not be urged? The booth, or in these years, the dark corner of a nave, or the lee of a hedgerow where a priest hears softly, becomes a place where the bed is translated into moral numbers. Penance follows in beads and bread, in alms and candles, a low arithmetic meant to set the balance right. For Margot, this lofty framework turns concrete in the rhythm of the week. On Monday she scrubs the board with sand and ash, and hangs the linens on the hedge to dry. On Tuesday she mends a rent in the shift's hem, cuts squares from a frayed towel for kitchen rags, and listens to the hen's gossip. Wednesday she tucks a sprig of rosemary into the wall's crack, because her mother did the same, and because the scent makes the room feel tidier than it is. Here is where theory walks through her door. On a Wednesday in Lent, Henrik's hand might rest on her shoulder as he passes the kneading board, Two good people must suddenly negotiate between a season the church calls holy restraint and a husband's weariness that is also a claim. The quarrel, if there is one, will be quiet and brief. Yet the swallow of guilt that comes after, whether from refusal or consent, lingers. That is what doctrine, in practice, feels like: a nudge that turns a simple moment into a moral sum. None of this is uniform, and we should be fair. No parish is identical to its neighbour. Some priests preach severity and demand a tally, others, tempered by the grief they bury weekly, counsel mercy and the ordinary kindness of spouses. Some households hold the rules as shields against chaos if we obey. Perhaps God will spare our buyer. Others keep them like a fence they step over without boasting. In taverns, men make light of clerical strictness. In bakehouses, women make light of men who brag. Even saints' lives preserve tender exceptions: wives who bargain with heaven for the safety of children, husbands who learn gentleness from catastrophe. Doctrine is a net. Human kindness is what sometimes cuts holes in it. Still, the prohibitions shape the days. Advent, 4 dim weeks holding a candle to winter. Lent, all 40, a kind of lean sorrow. Feast eves that land like sudden stones in the stream. Stack the rules strictly, and the number of sanctioned nights shrinks to a poor handful, dozens, perhaps inside a year, otherwise crowded with abstinence and uncertainty. The arithmetic is not law everywhere, but it is an influence everywhere. And in small rooms, influence feels like law. People talk about it the way they talk about weather, not as something they can change, but as something they must dress for. Margot learns to dress for it. She keeps an invisible calendar in the same head that remembers how much barley is left in the sack and which neighbour owes a favour. She does not think in categories like concupiscence and final causes. She thinks in candles. If she has promised to bring a taper to the church on Saturday night, she marks Saturday as a quiet evening. If the infant next door coughs in the night, she adds a prayer. And the prayer turns Sunday morning into a vow, and Sunday evening into restraint. When her courses come, she knots a scrap of cloth at the bedpost. Not because anyone mandates it, but because women's customs leave private markers, the way shepherds leave small cairns on the moor. And Henrik, he is no caricature of appetite. He too keeps fasts, hears sermons, watches the priest's face in the porch for reassurance after confession. Some nights he is bone-tired and grateful for a rule that excuses his weariness. Some nights he resents what feels like a stranger at the hearth, this invisible calendar that lifts his wife's gaze to the crucifix before it returns to him. Their negotiations are rarely spoken. Married life is mostly tacit language, the hand that reaches and then withdraws, the nod that says another time, the kindness of a blanket tucked higher when the wind is loud. In the space between doctrine and desire, they practice a grammar of signals that lets them remain decent to each other. It is easy, from centuries later, to imagine only oppression here. There is plenty of it, but there is also the steadiness that rules can give to frightened people. In a year trembling under rumours of plague, restraint can feel like a bargain struck with heaven. We will forgo what is dear in exchange for protection. Whether such bargains hold is a different matter. What matters for our story is that these rules are not arcane entries in a theologian's book. They are the air inside the cottage. They tell two people how to enter the night without frightening each other or themselves. Before the sun drops, Margot sets aside tomorrow's dough to rise beneath a cloth and trims a candle so it will burn evenly. She hears, distantly, the church bell count, the hour-low bronze reminders that someone, somewhere, is keeping time for everyone else. In that tolling, she hears the braided voices that rule her private life, the stern echo of old writers warning against pleasure's tyranny, the practical talk of neighbours who prefer order to rumour, the quieter counsels of women who make room for small mercies inside large prohibitions. When the curtain is drawn and the cat curls into a warm comma, the cottage is not a courtroom. It is only a room where two people, with more faith than certainty, try to match their breathing to a calendar they did not choose. Before dawn, the women arrive one by one, The way geese drift down to the same bend of the river without needing to call. Margot's mother first. Then a neighbour with a wicker basket. Then an aunt who is everyone's aunt. They settle at the bench beneath the tiny window where winter light scrapes in thin as milk. Bread dough rises under a cloth, and a kettle murmurs on its hook. This is the hour when the village's other curriculum begins, the one not written in saints' lives or scholars' disputations, but in the low talk of hands that know what bodies do and what fear does to them. In that talk, the body is a landscape of balances. Learned men write of humours hot and cold, wet and dry, moving through veins like seasons through fields. A well-tempered person is a mild summer, too much heat, and choler scorches the tongue to quick anger, too much cold, and melancholy slicks every thought. The women have never seen the Latin books, but they know the gist in their bones. They speak of cooling broths and warming spices, of how iron from a pot tastes different when you need it, of how a bath that is too hot turns the cheeks scarlet and the heart skittish. Balance is what keeps a household steady and a body upright. The learned texts also insist wrongly, but with the confidence of ink and seal, that female bodies are versions of male bodies turned inward, organs nested wherein men they hang like tools. This idea, repeated and embroidered for centuries, becomes a habit of thought. The outer is the model, and the inner is its shadow. From it flows a catalogue of errors that will bruise generations' assumptions about desire, about what a woman must feel or fail to feel to conceive, about what her blood means. None of that lofty talk appears in this cottage as theory. It appears as the cautious way a midwife asks questions, the way a cousin checks Margot's pulse with the back of her hand and listens for the lag between breath and answer. The village's medicine is conversational. It moves by proverb and example, by the memory of who bled too long last winter and who regained her strength on nettle soup. Blood is the topic. The room circles as cats circle a bowl. Cautious and intent. Monthly blood, Margot has learned, is both ordinary and ominous. Old tales cling to it like burrs it sours wine. Rustsiron, curls sprouting vines, takes the edge from knives. Pliny's sentences wander the centuries to arrive as parish rumour. Don't let a menstruant knead dough for feast bread. Don't let her near the dye vat. Don't let her pass the hive. The church adds its own shadow, Eve, grief, and punishment, so that the cycle becomes not just a sign of life, but a reminder of fault. Yet the women, who must live with bodies rather than ideas of bodies, shrug and get on with it. They have methods, imperfect but theirs. Cloth rags boiled, dried on hedges, used and rinsed again, woolen padding stitched into bands, peat moss gathered from a particular place on the moor, because that patch, for reasons no man needs to know, does the job better. There is a way to wash in winter rivers without numbing the fingers past usefulness. There is a way to pin your skirt to the belt so it clears the worst of the mud when you have to make for the privy in sleet. When cycles falter too thin, too heavy, too long-delayed remedies arrive from cupboard and field. Yarrow tea, to coax a reluctant body. Chamomile to quiet cramp. Raspberry leaf for steadiness. If a fever rides with the bleeding, the wise woman cracks an egg into a cup to read the white. A small augury that comforts, even if it convinces no one. The men think this is magic. The women know it is attention. They log each month by Moonsliver and Saint's Day, Saint Bride for snowdrops, Saint John for bonfires, so that a house's private calendar stays in rhythm with the public one. Not all remedies are gentle. Rue and pennyroyal keep company with tansy and savin, plants that promise control and sometimes deliver harm. The line between a dose that nudges the body and a dose that stops it dead is thin as a hair. They know this. They proceed anyway because fear of pregnancy without readiness, or in the wake of recent birth, is fear of death. By another name, alongside plants walk charms, a sliver of amber warmed in the hand and tucked against the breast to keep a pregnancy from slipping, a narrow ribbon knotted 3 times and untied in prayer at a threshold, a thin disc of jet hung from a child's neck to turn aside an evil look. A midwife pins a sprig of vervain above the bed and says a psalm. An aunt whispers, "Say Margaret's name over a belly that hardens and eases like a tide. Afterbirth, when it comes, must be handled with sense buried beneath the hearthstone to anchor future fertility, or under the threshold, so that every entering step reminds the house of its promise." The priest might frown. He also blesses the churching of women, the ceremony that welcomes a mother back to the nave after childbed, so the boundaries are porous. People live in that porosity. They hold a rosary in one hand and an herb in the other, not as rivals but as ropes tied to opposite banks of the same river. The learned medicine that filters down through peddlers' packets and city doctors' Latin boasts its own explanations for women's miseries. One is as old as it is wrong the wandering womb, an organ imagined as restless, capable of climbing toward the heart or the throat, choking breath and sense, if not coaxed back to its rightful place. Physicians prescribe scented fumigations below and foul odors at the nose, a shepherd's crook of smell meant to lure the organ downward. In cottages, the rule is simpler. Keep a frightened woman warm. Ease her with broth. Let another woman sit close enough to be a wall between her and panic. The womb does not wander, but fear does, and it can be herded. Because scholars have mismeasured women's bodies, they also misread women's capacity to consent. In some courts, a vicious notion takes root that conception requires a woman's pleasure, and so pregnancy after assault damns her not just to bearing but to blame. The women in the cottage know this to be cruelty parading as logic. They have seen sorrow lodge in a girl like a stone and still seen her belly swell. They cannot rewrite the court's beliefs, but they can build a mesh of witness and muteness, deciding who needs to know, who must never, and how to keep a neighbor from standing alone amid the worst of gossip. It is risk, more than theory, that shapes the cottage's choices. A child can cost a mother her life. Birth is work done at the cliff's edge. Midwives carry knives as well as swaddles, to cut cords or, in the bleakest hours, to baptize a breathless infant with a drop of water and a name before handing grief to its parents. They carry stories, too, of births that slid into the world like seals and of those that stalled with a stubbornness that felt like malice until a baby's shoulders turned. Afterward, the household steps through ritual 40 days in. The mother goes to church with a kerchief pinned neat and a candle clutched like a second heartbeat. The priest intones thanksgiving, and the women who watched and washed and waited answer with looks that say what the words cannot. You came back. Not every practice framed as healing is harmless. Somewhere in the next county a man sells powders glittering with ground metal. In a town to the south, a barber surgeon boasts of a tincture distilled from mercury. The richer you are, the more dangerous your cures can be. Peasants, too poor for extravagance, are spared some of the worst nostrums by the parsimony of necessity. Parsimony does not save them from everything. A tea taken in fear can end 2 lives. A fever ignored can drain a woman to a whisper. The women count losses. They continue. If you listen closely, you can hear scholarship and superstition argue in the same sentence and discover they are cousins. A midwife, tightening her belt, quotes a charm she half believes because her grandmother did. Then she checks a laboring woman's pulse with fingers that have learned to hear what doctors call signs, and she calls truth. Someone leafs through a leech book inherited from an uncle who once served in a monastery infirmary and traces an illuminated capital with a reverent finger. Someone else lifts a pot lid and judges by scent alone that the infusion is ready. A crucifix hangs over the bed. A sprig of rowan sits in the window latch. Everyone in the room holds 2 thoughts at once, that help comes from heaven, and that help also comes from a neighbor's clean hands. Margot listens, gathers, and stores what she hears the way she stores onions from the thatch. She learns to measure herself not against the hard outlines of borrowed theories, but against the softer, sturdier facts of how her own body rises and rests, warms and cools, fears and calms. She learns that secrecy can be kindness, and that speech can be shielded. She learns that the same community that peers at sheets also brings broth, stitch linens, and takes the children to the stream so a mother can sleep an hour longer than usual. It is not a simple world. It is a world when dusk licks the window black. The women knot their shawls and drift back into lanes rutted with cart tracks. The cottage exhales. In the quiet, Margot fingers the leather cord at her throat and the token that hangs from it, wood rubbed smooth, or a stone with a hole in it, or a tiny cross, and weighs what she has been given today, a bundle of leaves, a murmured blessing, a set of instructions for what to do if bleeding comes too strong, who to call if the pains arrive too early, which sprig to tuck over the lintel when the moon is new. It is not certainty. It is a kit for endurance, in a time when bodies carry so much risk and doctrine carries so much authority. This private curriculum keeps women alive between the lines, in a village that counts everything. Reputation is currency, and female reputation is the coin most easily tarnished. Margot learns this faster than new brides. Learn to fold a sheet alone. A girl's good name is not just a private comfort, it is a ledger entry that can raise or lower the price of a marriage bargain, secure or unravel a field's future, steady or shiver the thin roof over a family. Virginity, in this accounting, resembles a dowry item less tangible than a cow, more argued over than a boundary stone. The older women may joke to ease a bride's dread, but the joke is a fence around panic. Somewhere in the chorus of wedding laughter, someone will ask softly, as if asking the weather whether the sheet was shown. Sometimes it is just talk. Sometimes, in some places, the linen truly goes to the doorway, like a banner-spotted proof held up so the village can nod and scatter. It is a cruel theatre, not least because the body refuses to be drafted neatly into a spectacle. The myth is that a maiden's body will always bleed. The truth is that bodies vary, that horseback and hard work and simple difference mean the token may not appear. That gap between myth and truth is where danger lives. Because the village leans on signs, absence becomes suspicion. Then rumors run faster than any horse. A father who secured a marriage he can afford grows grey in the space of a month. A mother develops the habit of pressing her lips together when neighbors approach. When consummation is disputed, custom and church law give the quarrel a stage. Church courts do not keep their noses out of bedrooms. They walk in with ledgers and questions, translating whispers into depositions. A notary's pen scratches while a couple recount, separately, what happened and what did not. Witnesses' mothers, neighbors, the friend who lingered too close to the door on the wedding night are asked for what they heard, saw, suspected. At times there are bodily inspections, gloved hands and solemn faces passing judgment on facts that are not as simple as they hope. The point is not prurience for its own sake, it is inheritance. Until a union is consummated, law does not seat it fully in the world. Land, obligation, the naming of a child all wobble unless the bed's fact is established. So truth becomes a village project, and truth told in fear may come out crooked. Impotence cases take this intrusion to a sharper edge. A marriage may be annulled if it cannot be completed. That is the principle. The practice can be humiliating. Physicians are called. Elders are consulted. A husband's pride is prodded like an ox that balks at a gate. In some regions, into later centuries, judges devised mortifying proofs best left undescribed. Here, in Margot's day, it is bad enough that bodies are weighed like faulty tools and futures, balanced on testimony that no one should be forced to give. And yet, for a wife trapped by a union that threatens her life or hope, the same mechanism can be a key. Law, even when it shames, sometimes opens doors. Honor and property wind together most tightly in charges of sexual wrongdoing. The word rape, in many charters, means less what a modern ear hears than taking abduction. Zeitzure, a violent theft of a person from the control of her guardian. That meaning lets a community treat the outrage as injury to a father or husband rather than to the woman herself. The result is ugly arithmetic penalties rise or fall with status. A nobleman who violates a peasant's daughter may pay coin and continue, while a peasant who assaults a noble's kin faces ruin or the rope. None of this excuses the harm, which is borne by the woman's body and mind. It names the structure that refuses to see her as the primary wronged party. Inside that structure, the safest path for survival is often a network of women who gather swiftly and decide what will be told, to whom, and how to keep a neighbor from being left alone inside the blast radius of scandal. Adultery law draws the line even more unevenly. Spouses are not measured on the same scale. In many towns, a wife who breaks faith risks punishments that aim to scorch the shame from her in public shaved head, paraded in her shift, fined beyond her family's reach, shut behind a door until a husband decides how much mercy he can afford. Men, measured against a different script, may wander among unmarried women, servants, or licensed prostitutes without bearing the same civic thunder so long as they do not trespass on another man's claim. It is not that no husband ever answers for his betrayal, it is that the scale is weighted from the start. Where the church thunders, it thunders hardest at wives. Yet the same cities that frown officially on flesh for sale often choose regulation over fantasy. Brothels in certain districts are licensed, taxed, supervised by officials who pretend they are corralling vice for the community's safety. Women in those houses must wear marked clothing or colors that make their trade legible at a glance. They live under curfews and inspections, a regimented visibility that spares respectable streets. The anxiety of not knowing, it is hypocrisy, and policy braided together condemn with one hand, collect with the other. For some women, the brothel is a last harbour after ruin. For others, it is a trap with a ledger. Either way, the arrangement tells you more about civic nerves than about mercy. Communities also keep their own rough courts in the lanes. When private life insulted public norms, sexual boasting, cuckoldry displayed too boldly, a household turned upside-down neighbors might stage a charivari pots and pans, hammered in cacophonous scorn, masks and mock, animals, a donkey ride backward for the man who failed, a broom thrown for the wife whom gossip accused of ruling her husband. The noise is half joke, half threat. It says we heard, we judge, we can make your nights louder than you can bear. In some places they call it skimmington, in others something else. The point is policing without a magistrate, punishment with music that curdles the blood. It is the same drumming that saw Margot to her bed on her wedding night, turned from blessing to ridicule, depending on what story the village wants to tell about you. Not every verdict runs toward cruelty. The same custom that parades a woman can sometimes shelter her when a husband wrongs a wife in ways the law refuses to see. The village may prefer a quieter equilibrium, an uncle who speaks to the husband in the yard with his thumbs hooked in his belt, a priest who chooses a sermon from the book of Tobias and stares at a particular bench while he preaches, a neighbor who finds work for a woman so that she can stash a little coin in the hem of her skirt. Mercy thrives in the margins, even as spectacle struts down the middle of the lane. Because honor is public, testimony grows into a trade. There are people every village has them who witness professionally, which is to say, eagerly. They stood by the door, they saw the sheet, they heard a cry, they swear the couple slept apart for a week, they swear the wife speaks too freely with the miller. Some are malicious. Some believe they are safeguarding order. Some are simply filling an afternoon with importance. Their tongues can move land across a hedge. They can reshape the future of a household with a sentence begun in certainty and ending in invention. Against such tongues, women build countermeasures, the friendly visit timed to interrupt, the careful silence, the pious detail dropped in a doorway that turns gossip away like rain from a good thatch. Beneath the public racket, the church continues to weigh and stamp unions. Annulments for hidden kinship, consanguinity, discovered after the fact, can unravel marriages that look sturdy from the lane. Godparents and their lineages complicate what is permitted. Spiritual kin can tangle a match as effectively as blood. A couple may find themselves standing before a judge who explains that what was bound must be loosed, because someone's grandmother held someone else over a font. It feels like a riddle with a penalty. But it matters for the same tedious reasons everything here matters: property, inheritance, legitimacy, the right to name a child and mean it. If this all sounds like a map of snares, it is also a portrait of the importance small communities assign to predictable lines: who belongs to whom, who owes what, who may step where power feels precarious, rules grow barbs, where life is short and disease close. Control migrates into bedrooms because there is nowhere else to plant it. Does love survive here? Often. Stubbornly. Many couples manage their lives with a tenderness that keeps them safe from their neighbor's appetite for theater. They become experts at ordinary privacy: the quiet hand, the closed mouth, the chores done together that signal a household at peace. But for others, the space between rule and rumor is where a life can split. A man's boast in a tavern returns to his wife as a summons to shame. A woman's laughter in the wrong doorway becomes a narrative that widens with every retelling. One winter night, choose any, the village turns in early under a skein of cold sharp enough to nick. In Margot's cottage, the curtain is drawn, the fire banked, the cat breathing softly like a bellows. Out on the lane, footsteps scrape and pause. Two men confer. Low voices. Then move on. Nothing has happened. And yet everything has a sense that the house has been measured from outside and found to be correct for now. That is the opposite of intimacy. It is surveillance disguised as neighborliness. Margot lies awake, listening to the small sounds of her home: the rope bed creak, the settled sigh, the settling ash, and realizes that in this world a future can be decided by what strangers think they have heard through a door. Tomorrow will bring bread, choris, weather. Next year will bring seed time, perhaps a cradle. Between those solid things runs the thin, bright wire of reputation. Step carefully, and it hums. Touch it rashly, and it bites. Repression never fully wins. It sets up scaffolds of rule and shame, and people grow vines through them anyway. In the streets of a wealthy town, à jongleur, receipts à fabliaux those quick, wicked French tales where clever wives outfox dull husbands, where priests trip over their own vows, where bed curtains hide jokes as much as bodies. Everyone laughs too loudly, the way people laugh when they recognize themselves. These verses do not overturn doctrine, they function like a pressure valve, admitting that desire does not yield to ledgers without a fight. Far away in a castle solar, a lady turns pages of a romance and considers a different fiction, the creed of courtly love, that sees love purified in distance, perfected in yearning, ennobled by suffering. Between tavern farce and aristocratic sigh stands the ordinary marriage, which borrows from both fantasies when it needs to humor to survive, tenderness to endure. Desire finds its own idioms. Nightmares, those sudden chokings that nail a sleeper to the bed, become tales of the incubus and succubus, the male and female demons said to harvest the body's strength through nocturnal visitation. Learned men write careful pages about how such spirits might steal seed and carry it elsewhere, how a demon could take on the shape of a known face to confound a penitent. Priests practice blessings against what they interpret as assaults. In the cottage, people answer spectres with practical ritual, a charm stitched into a pillow seam, a psalm mumbled before sleep, iron set discreetly by the door. What we would call sleep paralysis, they call a visitation. The name matters less than the comfort of having a story to set against fear. Stories are technologies. 2. Other stories expose power. Some say a lord may claim the first night with a peasant's bride, a rumor that passes down centuries under many names. Historians will argue over how often such a right existed in law or practice. The rumor itself, true or not in any given valley, is revelation enough. It says that people recognized how absolute power leans toward the threshold of the bed. Margot's village may dismiss the tale as city gossip, but the fact that anyone can imagine it tells you what the world expects from those who command rents. Grain, and oaths that nothing is entirely safe from reach. Not all the shadow world is sinister. Spring arrives, and with it May Day. Young people slip into the woods to fetch boughs, and if some return with roses and others with a new shyness in their eyes, the village performs a tolerant blindness. It pretends is virtue. Bonfires leap on St. John's Eve. Wheels of fire roll downhill like small suns. Couples jump the embers together in a quick covenant with luck. A broom tied with sprigs of green hangs over a door. A loaf baked with anise is carried in procession. A wreath laid on a cow's horn promises fattening loaf baked. No one calls these rites pagan. They are simply what you do to keep a household aligned with the year. The church frowns and then absorbs what it cannot erase, setting saints to stand where older spirits stood, allowing laughter where it does least harm. Courtship itself makes room for ingenuity. In certain regions, a board laid between two betrothed, a bundling board permits talk through the night without scandal and, sometimes, without consequence. Families use it to test whether conversation and patience can stand in for hastiness. The board is not foolproof, nothing is, but it insists that futures are better judged by the grammar of a long dialogue than by a single evening's appetite. In a world otherwise quick to censure, anything that slows the rush to judgment is a small sanity. Night, of course, has more tools than day. Lovers learn the topography of secret paths across the back meadow after the last bell, through the coppice where a gate hangs cocked, along the river track where moonlight pours itself thinly. They code feelings into harmless errands and fold confessions into the ordinary chatter of market day. A glance is a letter no one can intercept. A ribbon tucked into a basket is an answer. Does this undermine households sometimes? Does it also save people who would break under the weight of constant policing? Sometimes that, too. We do not have to praise betrayal to admit how harsh civilizations manufacture it and how tenderness, even illicit, can be a form of keeping one's soul from going entirely numb. Behind the public drum of reprimand, there is a quieter counterculture of care. Midwives refuse to pass gossip about a girl who came to them pale with a question she could not ask aloud. A parish priest with tired eyes treats confessions not as traps but as chances to say, "Be gentle, be patient. The rule exists for love, not against it." And then sets a light penance. A guild of women call them friends. Cousins. Godmothers circulates advice that begins not with sin but with safety. Keep coin in your hem, know which neighbor to trust. Keep the latch string drawn on nights when the lane sounds wrong. Networks do what statutes refuse to attempt. Astrologers earn their crust at noble tables, poring over ephemerides to declare auspicious nights for conception. A boy under this moon, a prudent girl under that star. In cottages, sky watching is simpler plant by the moon because your mother did. Say a prayer to Saint Pri. And when the wheat ears first nod, kings imagine their heirs tuned by the heavens. Peasants imagine their children favored by saints. These are two dialects of the same hope, the desire to swing the odds in a world where odds feel like a lord's personal sport. Armies abstain by command before a campaign, as if victory were a cup that spills if jostled by desire. Sailors tell each other that storms punish a ship with too much laughter aboard. Superstitions scaffold discipline where discipline is hard to keep. Are they true? Their truth is sociological. An army hungry and chaste may feel sharper. A ship's company that guards its oar may row with more respect for the sea. Belief is a tool that shapes behavior, which in turn shapes outcomes. In such loops, entire cultures move. And what of Margot years pass and carve gentler channels in her face? She plants rosemary by the door, not because it repels witches to a certainty, but because its smell says home when she returns from the stream with her skirts damp to the knee. She bars the door on certain nights as a statement that safety can be chosen. She keeps the bundling board beneath the bed because there will come an evening. Adicade hense. When a daughter will ask whether conversation might be allowed where silence used to be, and Margot will produce the board like an heirloom of kindness. She saves coins in a seam. She convinces Henrik to laugh louder at the Charivari when it strikes a neighbor, so that their laughter covers, as much as it can, their refusal to join the cruelty. In the space, doctrine leaves open for prudence and charity. She plants a garden. Sometimes, tenderness wins in the plain daylight of the cottage. A husband returns from a hiring fair older in the eyes than his years. A wife hands him the handsome cup they keep for feast days and says nothing about what he failed to bargain. They eat their pottage, and after the bowl is washed, they sit with their hands touching on the bench. And no one outside hears anything at all. That is resistance. Too not salacious, not dramatic, but a refusal to let other people's rules write every line of one's story. The watchers in the lane will not disappear. Confession will not stop asking precise questions. Rumor will not fall permanently silent. But the fact that people live decently despite those pressures is as historical as any decree. The Middle Ages were not one unbroken austerity. They were improvisations under constraint, in which people hoarded small liberties like kindling against long winters. The bedroom was never truly private and rarely safe. Still, inside its curtained space, many learned a choreography of kindness in a glance that means not tonight, in a hand that offers warmth without claim, in the courage to say yes and the equal courage to say no. Stand again at that doorway where we began. Candlelight strokes the rafters. The year is still 1347 or already 1350. It scarcely matters, for the lesson is the same. When we peer through this keyhole in time, we see fear and power, but also the odd, undestroyed glint of choice. The church sets rules, custom sets traps, poverty sets the stage, gossip supplies the chorus, and yet the players improvise. They walk their narrow boards and keep from falling by holding fiercely to one another. If this journey through the medieval room unsettled you, good. It should. But let it also tune your ear to the present rooms, the ones where rules drape themselves as virtue, where surveillance calls itself care, where people still negotiate desire and safety under watchful eyes. Ask which customs today are wisdom, which are fear in costume, and where mercy is waiting to be smuggled back across the threshold. Only then does the past finish its work in us, not as spectacle, but as a mirror that invites better choices in the rooms we call our own.